I think when I'm training in the gym, I see, speaking of technique, I obviously hold my tongue, but there's so much evidence of poor
Yeah.
technique. And it does seem to be almost like a virus. It just spreads. So there's guys that are, they have all the plates, all the 45s on the leg press, and they're doing 5 degrees of knee flexion on, on the leg thing. Or, they're like heaving their bodies to get, the 40s on the bicep curls. Like just like drop the ego, strip the bar a little bit. So I wanted to maybe talk a little bit about full range of motion, and we can talk about different types of ranges
Yeah.
like stretching, long length partials, isometrics. But first, just to double click a little bit on good technique. How do we determine, let's say with a squat, for example, how do we determine that we are moving in a biomechanically efficient way that is targeting or specifying the muscle that we are trying to activate?
Yeah. So I might have told this story on the last interview, but I repeat this one often because I had an epiphany years ago as a trainer, and it really helped me communicate what I'm about to get to. So years ago, I was on a hike. There's some foothills up here in Northern California, really nice areas to hike. And I was hiking, and every once so often a runner would pass by. And I'm a trainer, so I tend to look at biomechanics. Okay, it just happens. So I'd see someone run by and be like, "Oh my God, their feet are pronating. Ooh, that's a strong anterior pelvic tilt. Oh no, that person's okay."
Same. I'm a chiropractor. I'm like, oh, pelvic tilt.
Yeah, and I just see that, and I'm like, "Oh my God, that person's gonna hurt if they whatever." And then somebody ran by with just they ran like a gazelle. It was beautiful technique that just ran by. And then I thought, and a lot of people don't know this. There's two skills, physical skills that humans evolved to do very, very well. One of them is to throw with accuracy. We can throw with incredible accuracy. A 5-year-old could throw with better accuracy than any other primate. And then the other is running. Believe it or not, now it doesn't. You wouldn't know that now because we stopped running when we're 10. But the truth is, when it comes to like distance, just traveling for distance, trekking, humans can outlast almost any animal. This is how we hunted as hunter gatherers. We would, throw a spear at an animal and then we'd chase it for miles and miles and miles until it got fatigued. So we're actually built to run, but you wouldn't know this. So this person runs by with this beautiful technique. I said, why do we all run so bad? We evolved. And I said, oh, I know why. Nobody views running like a skill. People, hit 30 or whatever, and they say, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go work out. They put on the running shoes, and then they don't go relearn the skill of running. They just go and run until they're tired. This is how we view all exercise. You go to the gym, you do strength training. You're not looking at a skill. You're not looking at the squat as a skill or the press as a skill or a row as a skill or whatever. We're looking at it like quads, shoulders, back, chest. So you just go do the exercise until you feel that muscle burn or get sore, and then mission accomplished. Strength training is a skill. And what happens is that you take an exercise like a squat. Okay, you said the squat, right? You take an exercise like the squat. On one end, you have high risk of injury, low potential for results and success. And on the other end, you have extremely low risk of injury, very high potential for results and success. And what determines where you are on that scale is this how well you can perform the skill of squatting. Like, how good are you at squatting with good biomechanics, good stability, good balance? How well are you performing the skill? Okay, so what do you do with this information? Don't go to the gym and say to yourself, today is, butt and leg day. I'm going to go hammer my butt and legs, or today's back day. Go to the gym, look at your exercise and say, I'm going to go to the gym and get really good at perfecting the skill of these exercises. Today I'm supposed to squat. I'm supposed to bench press. I'm supposed to row. I'm going to go practice those lifts, and I'm going to do them, and I'm going to keep practicing them so I get really good at mastering those exercises. That will give you so much better results, especially in the long term, than going to the gym and just viewing exercises as a means to an end to hit a target area. The skill is so important that, like I said, you could take I can make any exercise extremely dangerous. I can also take any exercise done properly with good stability, good balance, good control is perfectly safe. Pick the most crazy looking dangerous exercise that exists. if a person can perform it with good strength, stability, control, they're not going to hurt themselves. Pick the easiest exercise in the world. Have somebody do it without those things. You are probably going to hurt yourself. And take injury out of there. Like you want your body to really develop and progress, then master the skill of it. So think of it like this. Like if you wanted to get better at basketball, which we all view as a skill, imagine if you went on the court, you never played basketball before, and you just ran and threw the ball as fast and hard as you could so you could get tired. Like you would never get good at basketball. You would never get good at the skill of it. So get good at the skill of strength training and you'll get way better results. All right, so what does that mean? Well, thankfully we have the internet now, so you can pull up videos and tutorials on exercise technique and form, and try to get as good as you can copying that. And if you can't, scale back and make the exercise easier and slowly work yourself to a point where you're performing the exercise the way you're supposed to. So if it's a squat, for example, which is a very technical, it's a natural movement. We're all designed to squat.
I'm so happy you're saying this because I had to. Okay, keep going. Yes.
Yeah.
Keep going.
Yeah. So
it's very technical.
Yes.
Yeah.
So squatting is a natural human movement. We're supposed to be able to squat. We lose the ability to squat because we stop squatting, at a very young age. I mean, if you go to countries where they don't even have chairs, like you go to Okinawa, some of the traditional homes, they still sit on mats and on the floor and stuff. And people into their 80s and 90s are getting up and off the ground and squatting. So we're made to, squatting is a natural movement, but we lose the skill. That's my point. We're not able to. So you're getting into squatting. It's highly technical. If you haven't squatted for a while, especially if you haven't squatted with resistance, so you go and you try to do it, and you're just like, your heels come up, your knees are going in, you feel tight in your back, something doesn't feel right. All right, take the weight off the bar or go no weight. Now try it. Ooh, that still bothers me here. Okay, don't squat so deep. Make it shorter. Go down as far as you can until you feel like things starts to break down. And then what you do is you slowly, over time, get to the point where you can go a little lower, a little lower, a little lower, a little lower. And then, of course, it might be more complicated. Okay, I need to work on mobility on my ankle. I need to strengthen my core, whatever. But slowly work so you can get that technique. And then you start to add load. Okay, now I'm going to add a little bit of weight. And then, by the way, this entire time, you're building muscle and strength. This entire time, your body's developing. It's not like you have to squat perfectly to get your body to progress. This entire process of learning the skill is strength training. It's just you have to approach it that way if you want to do this in a very effective and simultaneously safe way.
Yeah. I'm so happy you're saying this because I've had to relearn how to squat. So I would always ego lifting. I'd always be putting more weight. And then I would get to a certain number and just like clockwork, I twinge the knee and then I'd have to peel it all back and start again. And I think that it is, for a lot of women, at least that I survey, they'll say, oh, I only feel squats in my quads. I never feel them in my glutes. And it's like, okay, so we have to work on some ankle mobility, some activation through the foot, how you're pressing up, how deep are you going in the hole, all the things that you were just saying. And if I can add, and I'd love your thinking on this, this is where I've introduced tempo into my training more so in recent years, where the slower that I can move, and this just might be me, but the slower that I can move on the eccentric, the more I can feel the muscles that I want to feel. Yeah. And then of course it's going to reduce the injury risk, and I'm not bouncing around and using momentum to kind of get back up. What are your thoughts on tempo? What do you like using tempo personally in your in your program prescriptions? What are you thinking? What do you think about eccentric control?
Oh, one of my favorite variables to manipulate. But look, the faster you move, the more skill and mastery you need to have of an exercise. So you take a movement that you could do well slowly, and you do it quickly. You have to be really, really good at mastering the exercise before you can move quickly. So explosive movements, you don't want to do anything explosive or fast unless you are you really got the movement, because it just raises the risk of injury. But generally speaking, you want a tempo where the negative portion of the rep is taking about 4 seconds. There's maybe a 1 second pause at the bottom, and then about 2 or 3 seconds on the way up. That's a nice general tempo, but you could go slower or faster. They all seem to provide benefit, and there also seems to be a novelty effect where if you always train with one particular tempo, moving outside of that seems to get the body to start to respond again. But yeah, I mean, as a trainer, as a coach, slower tempos are what I worked with all the time because you just have more control. We're going to perfect the exercise better. We're going to do it better. And I'm able to adjust the rep easier as we're going through it versus when you're going fast. When you're going fast, then it gets, very challenging. If you're off a little bit, well, how do I correct you, mid rep? But, you mentioned something interesting about feeling a muscle. The more experience you get, the more important this actually becomes. In the very beginning, how the muscle feels, and I'm going to be very careful with how I say this. It can sometimes be misleading. I'll give you an example. Okay. So I'll get a brand new client who's never strength trained before, and then I'll have them do a tricep press down with a rope, right? Where they push the weight down, and they'll feel it in their core. Oh, I feel that in my abs. Okay. So that's not a core exercise, but they feel it in the core because they're having to stabilize their body while do the exercise. And because they're so deconditioned, they're going to feel it in all these different ways. So when it comes to people in their first year, I would say, of strength training, it's more important to master the skill of the exercise than it is to try to feel what muscles you're trying to target. Now, as you get more advanced, then like yourself, well, now you can get in and you could probably make a squat glute or quad, right? You can make a bench press delt or pec or tricep just by, what muscles you're trying to work. But in the beginning, it's like, I'm looking at your form and technique, and what I'm looking for is, does this hurt? Do we have pain? Do you feel unstable? Are you feeling this too much in areas that you shouldn't? Like, my low back or something like that. But I'm really trying to just perfect form and technique. And then if I am trying to get someone to feel a muscle, it's typically either for correctional exercise purposes. So you may have somebody who, they might have a muscle that might be so disengaged just because of movement patterns that they almost can't even activate it. Like an easy example would be, someone can't activate their rhomboids or mid-trapezius to pull their shoulder blades, back and down. You ask them to do this and they end up doing this, right? And so getting them to feel those muscles can sometimes be important for correctional exercise. And the way I'll do that is I'll give them, feedback from the outside. So I'll touch the muscle. That helps you. Oh, okay, I see where I need to feel it. And then, or do an isolation exercise before you move to the compound lift, just so you know what you're trying to feel. So like, again, using the squat as an example, I've been doing squats for a year. I feel like I'm good at them. I never feel them on my butt. I want to develop my butt. Then what I might have you do is 1 or 2 sets of hip thrusts with light weight where you squeeze the glutes at the top. So you've got that connection. Okay, I can feel my glutes now. All right, now let's do the squat and try and see if you can get that feeling with the squat. And then people do these micro adjustments with their technique because they've got that feedback, and then they can hit the glutes a little bit more with the squat. But that's as we start to progress. But in the beginning, it's like technique. Technique is everything. And I'm looking for, does this feel wrong? Does it feel unstable? Do you feel pain?
Yeah. And I to your point earlier around the motor learning, that is the goal. So let's say you have someone with an arthrotide, some osteoarthritis or rheumatoid or something that's destroying the joint. Like your goal is not necessarily to put all the weight on the bar or whatever on the machine. It's really just to, as you were saying, to learn the movement pattern properly, and if possible, work towards a full range of motion. So if you can move the joint, move the muscle through that full ROM first, then you can start to play with some of the things that we're talking about. So like the long length partials and isometric hold and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, full range of motion is extremely important, but I will add this caveat here. Only move in the range of motion that you feel you own. And then from there, try to increase the range of motion incrementally over time. The reason why I say that is sometimes people will hear that. I've actually had it happen on the podcast. Somebody will write in and be like, I did, butt to the ground squats, like you said, and I hurt my back. I'm like, oh, I got to make sure I communicate this right. Like, don't go past a range of motion you don't feel like you own because you think, oh, the range of motion is superior, because then what ends up happening is you end up hurting yourself. Now, that being said, the range of motion that you train is where a majority of the strength you gain is going to be applied. There's some carryover outside of it, but it's mostly in that range of motion. So if you train in a short range of motion and you get really strong in that short range of motion, the discrepancy between the range of motion that you train and that you're strong in and the range of motion you don't train in that hasn't caught up starts to become so large, you actually increase your risk of injury. So this is why you'll have like a bodybuilder who's obviously got lots of muscle and strength. They'll go to the park and throw a Frisbee and they'll throw their shoulder out. It's like, well,
Right.
what happened? Well, they have all these big prime movers and they're really strong in these specific movements, but their stabilizers can't support all the strength and they don't train outside a particular range of motion. In fact, the myth of being muscle bound or that strength training makes you tight comes from that subcategory or population of individuals. Like if you always train in a particular range of motion where particular exercises, you never move laterally, you never train your body with rotation or whatever, what ends up happening is your body, because you're building all this muscle and strength, and this might not apply to most people watching, but just so people, if they witness this, strength training doesn't make you tight. Strength training done properly is the most effective way to build what's called functional flexibility. Like nothing builds functional flexibility like strength training, meaning if you did static stretching, you would gain a larger range of motion, but you wouldn't build strength in that larger range of motion. So you would actually become potentially more unstable. In fact, and I'm sure you could speak to this as a chiropractor, the most unstable people in the world are hypermobile people who are weak.
Yep.
Like that's injury all over the place. So strength training builds strength in the ranges of motion. It gives you what's called functional flexibility. So I can move in this range of motion, but I also have strength in it so I don't hurt myself. But what ends up happening when you train in specific exercises, you're only focused on building muscle, you're only focused on looking good, is your body, as you start to build strength, starts to protect itself more and more because you're really strong moving this way, but you're not as strong moving this way. So what we're going to do is we're going to limit your movement. And so then you look like you're muscle bound. So you see those people that, quote unquote meatheads that like, why do they look so stiff? Well, it's because their body's literally like trying to protect them, because if they move outside of what they're strong in, there's a high risk of injury. But for the average person listening, if you train properly and you utilize a variety of movements and you don't neglect anything and you work through full range of motion and don't compromise that, you'll have very fluid, balanced movement, a great range of functional flexibility. That's really what it can provide if done right.